It's Monday, July 14th, 2025, and we're going to see a tropical system start to bring impacts to Florida today. This is it in its current state, and it doesn't look like anything super special, but we can see some very clear spinach out here off of the eastern coast of Florida, and we can actually see a couple of convection towers blooming in the most recent satellite scans. And all of this is indicative of some storm organization. Now, our simulated reflectivity is showing that around right before midday today, we'd start to see impacts to the eastern coast of Florida. And our main center of our storm is, of course, going to be off the eastern coast of Florida. But we're going to start to see a rain band push through the state, and this could bring some severe gusts in excess of 60 miles an hour and possibly some small hail. And the threat of possibly a weak spin-up tornado is actually not going to be zero with these storms, and by around late afternoon, these storms will have made their way all the way to the middle of the state, with them reaching the Tampa Bay area by the evening hours. And when the low jet kicks in around the evening hours, this is when we could see that spin-up tornado potential sort of maximize, and also the threat of all hazards of severe weather. So some strong gusts possibly being damaging in excess of 60 miles an hour, and some small hail could possibly maximize around this hour, and then it will push out into the Gulf after nightfall. And the main threat with these storms would be the absurd amount of rainfall that they are going to drop on the state. Starting around right before midday, we would start to see our first blotches of 4 inches of rain, and we can see just widespread areas covered in 4 to 5 inches of rain, with a maximum rainfall of around 8 inches right here in central Florida. So the flash flooding risk will definitely be apparent today. Now, currently on the National Hurricane Center, they have highlighted a INVEST, which is that low pressure system, in a area of organization over here with only a 20% chance of organizing. And I think as we go further through the day, this risk will skyrocket, as what I'm about to show you hints at a lot of organization and possibly some organization very quickly. Here are our European ensembles, and we can see that even today it's hinting at possibly a tropical depression forming off of the eastern coast of Florida. And this is a look by Tuesday, and we can see a lot of agreement of a tropical depression, with even possibly a weak tropical storm being hinted at here. I don't think that's likely, but the likelihood of a tropical depression possibly impacting the eastern coast of Florida looks very real here on Tuesday. And then after it interacts with the state, it will return to the Gulf, where we just see an explosion of some models hinting at some formation of something tropical out here, possibly a tropical storm and possibly even a strong tropical storm. And as we keep moving forward, this is a look by Thursday, and we can still see an explosion, with even a couple of models hinting at possibly even a weak hurricane forming from this. Now, the likelihood of that happening is not currently super high, but we will continue to monitor this situation. And a lot of the models are showing a impact anywhere between the eastern border of Texas all the way up to the Pensacola area. But it looks like we could definitely get, at least at the bare minimum, a tropical depression, a tropical storm, and even a weak hurricane is not out of play. The main things fueling this storm are going to be the scalding hot ocean sea surface temperatures, which are going to allow this storm to organize and strengthen very quickly. We see a little tongue out here off the eastern coast of Florida of some very hot temperatures, and then once we enter the Gulf, we have some of the warmest sea surface temperatures in pretty much the entire world available to this storm, which would allow for some pretty quick organization and strengthening. And then once the storm enters the Gulf, it appears that it would also have quite a bit of ocean heat content to work with, which would also aid in some organization as well. Now, some things that we're going to see is that in this area where this storm is going to develop, I want you to look here from the eastern coast of Florida all the way out into the Gulf. We're actually going to see an area of some muted shear, or not really any shear, in the storm's path. Here's a look from the 15th, and the storm is going to be right here in a pocket of quite literally zero wind shear. And then as we move forward, it looks like that pocket is going to pretty much follow the storm all the way up to when it could possibly interact with land and become a landfalling storm. Another thing to note is that this storm is going to have a very moist area of air to work with, although it could possibly be battling a bit of dry air right after it crosses out into the western coast of Florida. We can see it kind of get sucked up into there. But overall, it's going to have a pretty moist air mass to work with, which would also aid in some organization and intensification. So it looks like this storm is going to have an environment super primed for organization. On another note, we do have a risk of severe weather today. We have a marginal risk of severe weather out here in the northern plains, and another marginal risk of severe weather, which is going to be out here in the mid-Atlantic to northeast, then just a general risk of thunderstorms, which spans a lot of the U.S. I do think at least a marginal risk will be implemented down here in Florida with those storms associated with our low pressure system off the coast, which could possibly turn into a tropical depression. And a couple areas to look for some stronger storms, although possibly not of severe levels, would be along a boundary here stretching pretty much from the southern plains and the Mississippi River Valley. And then down here in the southwest, we could see an area of possibly some strong storms, then all the way up our upper plains convergence zone as well. Now, the main threat with all these storms is going to be pretty much a wind threat. We have a 5% chance of some severe gust in both of our marginal risk areas, and in both of these areas there is definitely the possibility of a couple of storms producing 60-mile-an-hour damaging winds, and there's also going to be a pretty conditional 5% risk of some hail up here in the northern plains, where there could be some hail in excess of 1 inch in diameter. And the Storm Prediction Center has implemented no tornado risk at all, but I do think that the environment down here in Florida could possibly be conducive for a spin-up tornado. And then here is our flood risk. We already talked about our flood risk down here in Florida, but we have another area of concern up here in the mid-Atlantic to northeast, which could receive widespread 2 to 4 inches of rain. Then we have a lot of marginal risk of some flash flooding. Up here is going to be a risk of receiving anywhere between 1 to 2 inches rain in the northern plains. So we have a bit of an elephant trunk shape, which kind of goes from central Texas all the way up into the Mississippi River Valley from here. And really anywhere in this marginal, there could be 1 to 2 inches of rain, with a increased probability of some rain down here in central Texas once again, unfortunately. And here is a look at our rainfall up here in the mid-Atlantic to northeast region. We can see that around the afternoon today, we could see widespread areas of 2 to 4 inches of rain, with a couple areas possibly even receiving 5 inches of rain. So definitely a flash flood risk could be in play up here. And then the other area piquing my interest is going to be, unfortunately, down here in central Texas. Yet again, it does look like there is going to be a corridor from some intense rainfall that would fall in the afternoon hours today. And in this corridor right north of San Antonio, we could see anywhere between 2 to possibly 5 inches of rain. Here's our simulated reflectivity from our mid-Atlantic and northeast risk area. We can see that we're going to get some storms around the midday hours, with them becoming severe potentially in the early to mid-afternoon, and then them peaking in intensity in the late afternoon to evening hours. And our main corridor for storms appears that it's going to be from southern New York all the way into central Virginia. And these storms are going to be aided by some frontal activity, which stretches pretty far across the region, and then a short wave moving through the area, which would lead to our most intense corridor of storms, likely being anywhere from central Virginia all the way up to central Pennsylvania. And these storms would pose that threat for some damaging gusts, potentially in excess of 60 to 65 miles an hour. And it looks like after the evening hours, the main risk with these storms would just be quite a bit of rainfall to the region before they move off into the Atlantic in the night hours. Our second area of interest for some severe weather is going to be up here in the northern plains. Here's our simulated reflectivity, and we can see that around the mid-afternoon hours, we could get a cluster of some strong storms up here along what appears to be a bit of a boundary left by some troughing. And it does appear that we could get some organized storms back here in northern Montana, which would also be in that late afternoon to evening hours. And those would pose the threat for some hail and damaging winds, and also so would this cluster back here in parts of North Dakota. And here's a look from a bit more south. We can see that we could see some strong storms, probably not reaching severe weather, pretty much anywhere along our upper plains convergence zone, stretching all the way from the southeastern tip of Montana all the way into northern New Mexico. And then back here in the southwest, we could see some organized clusters of some possibly severe storms in the mid-afternoon to evening hours along a area of convergence right here along the Arizona and New Mexico border, and then a high pressure system providing some organizing shear and possibly an area of increased moisture on its periphery. And then stretching pretty much anywhere from Texas, central Texas actually, all the way up into our main risk area in the mid-Atlantic is going to be a stationary boundary, which could possibly bring some strong to severe clusters to pretty much anywhere along that, with a increased probability actually being down here in central Texas. Here are 500 millibar winds, and we can actually see that short wave, which is going to be pushing through the mid-Atlantic region, which is going to bring or help to bring some of those strong to severe storms out here. And then we see just an area of some pretty strong flow up here in the northern US, and we're going to see multiple rounds or short waves move through the region, which are going to lead to those areas of increased threats of severe weather. We see one here around midday moving through South Dakota, and then we'll see another short wave or kink back here in Minnesota, which is going to lead to our two clustered areas of storms. And then we'll see an area of high pressure along much of the southwest, which could bring some organizing shear to our clusters of storms down here in the southwest and really anywhere along our upper plains convergence zone. And then here is a weather sounding from Florida. Our hodograph looks very interesting, and this wouldn't really be conducive for any types of severe weather. And then our shear overall is going to be pretty poor, but because there is a high pressure system situated in the Gulf, I wouldn't be surprised to see some higher bulk shear, possibly being around 25 to 30 knots, which could lead to some organized storms. Our low level lapse rates are going to be incredibly steep, which would help to support that threat for some severe winds. We also even have a bit of cape up here near our freezing layer, although that's going to be very high, and our mid-level lapse rates are going to be pretty weak. So the risk of hail down here in Florida is going to be next to nothing, and the risk of seeing anything greater than a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch in diameter is going to be pretty much zero. We also see quite a moist environment down here in Florida as per usual at a 76 dew point. Then we're going to have an extremely unstable air mass at around 4,500 joules per kilogram, which would help to definitely support that threat for severe weather. We also have a very high precipitable water air mass, which will lead to that flooding threat, and then could also help with some stronger downdrafts and that risk of strong damaging winds. And we also have a ton of 3 Cape down here, nearing 250. And then because there's also going to be a lowest cloud level, which would be low enough for the threat of tornadoes to be possible, coupled with this insane amount of 3 Cape, I actually wouldn't even rule out the risk of possibly a spin-up tornado, which wouldn't be uncharacteristic at all with tropical systems like the one that is spinning off of the eastern coast of Florida. And then here is a weather sounding from our northern plains risk area. We see a fairly straight hodograph, and our shear isn't going to be super great in the low levels, but our bulk shear or organizing shear is going to be around 40 knots. So definitely some organized storms out here in the northern plains. Our lowest cloud level is going to be a bit higher, which would be indicative of that mostly wind and hail threat from some high base storms. We also see a decent bit of cape up here near our freezing layer, and our mid-level lapse rates are going to be 8.7 Celsius decreasing per kilometer. So I definitely do think large hail could be in play, possibly larger than 1.5 inches in diameter. We also see a modestly moist air mass, definitely enough moisture to get it done in this region of the US. Then we also see 3,000 joules per kilogram of cape, so definitely favorable for severe weather. Then we see a precipitable water of 1.4 inches, a downdraft cape of 1,300, and then a relative humidity of anywhere between 60 and 40%. So all things which would help to increase that threat for severe winds. So up here in the northern plains, I definitely think there will be some high base storms bringing that threat for some damaging winds in excess of 60 to 65 miles an hour, and some large hail, possibly even in excess of 1.5 inches in diameter. And our last risk area that we're talking about is going to be up here in the mid-Atlantic to northeast, and there's not really much to talk about shear wise, but like always, there's going to be a moist air mass in place coupled with a modestly unstable environment at around 2,500 joules per kilogram and a very high precipitable water. So all these things would be conducive for some severe weather. Then the precipitable water would be conducive for some stronger downdrafts and possibly bringing that damaging wind risk. Then our 3 Cape is going to be pretty high at around 150, which will help to support that threat for general severe weather. But out here, it's mostly just going to be some winds in excess of 60 to 65 miles an hour and likely really nothing else.